There's a time for remembering, a time to recall the trials and the triumphs, the fears and the falls. There's a time to be grateful for the moments so blessed, the jewels of our memory, where love is our guest. There is gold that is gleaming in a past we once knew, in our tears and our laughter, 'twas love brought us through. There's a road we have traveled where sunlight has kissed, that carries us onwards when loved ones are missed. There is treasure in our fields, there is treasure in our skies, there is treasure in our dreaming, from the soul to the eye. For wherever we gather in the light of God's grace, and for all whom we remember, there will ever be a place. The evening, at the close of the day, we will rest on our journey, to the Lord we shall pray. May we thank God for blessings, for the moments we've shared, as we seek for tomorrow. Close by us you'll stay. There is treasure in our fields, there is treasure in our skies, there is treasure in our dreaming, from the soul to the eye. For wherever we gather in the light of God's grace, and for all whom we remember, and for all whom we remember, there will ever be a place.
Díguibh go léir a cóide agus tá fáilte wrote, welcome to my story with me, Mary Honan. And my very special guest today is the wonderful James Kilbane, who he's a multi-platinum selling Christian gospel, country and Irish folk singer. And he was runner-up in Ireland's national talent television show Eurostar in 2003-2004. And of course, since then, he has established his career with his mix of gospel, Christian, folk, and country music. And I was only talking to James off camera and saying that one thing that we have in common, I suppose, is that we were both born in the same hospital, in the same city, in London. We were both born in Park Royal Hospital. Hello, James. How are you?
Hello, Mary, and hello to all your viewers and listeners to the podcast. How are you all? Good.
Absolutely, absolutely great, James. Really looking forward to interviewing you. Well, tell me about your early life, James, and what it was that um, I suppose developed this love of music with you, and why you chose the genre, I suppose, that you did, because you could have chosen any area of music.
Well, I guess talking about London and Harleston, like I was part of mum and dad were immigrants from Achill Island, and my uncle lived in the house as well, one of my mum's brothers, and he had lots of records. He was in his early 20s, Elvis. Dad had the Carpenters, Johnny Cash, Marty Robbins, the Carpenters, Charlie Pride. Mum was a big fan of Charlie Pride. There was a bit of Jim Reeves in the mix as well. Big Tom, Margot. So
so,
when I
so there was
when
a
I was
mix.
there was, yeah, I actually have a memory of going to a concert and I was only a boy in Hammersmith or some one of those big theaters, and just being memorized by, at the time, and I was only maybe 4, and I was at this kind of a daytime matinee type of concert, and I remember being all excited that Margot was out on the stage singing and that, and it was what it was at the time, and that was my early. So that's probably watching Top of the Pops, sneaking out the door. I'd be gone to bed, but I'd be looking, watching Top of the Pops on the Wednesday or Thursday night through the door in London. Like we had
Yeah.
we were lucky back in those days in London. We had a color TV. Mum and Dad rented a color TV. That's
Well,
what
we
we
had a
had.
colour TV in England as well, and my grandmother had it in Chaplin Road. And then, of course, we came to Ireland, and the TVs started to come in, and they were black and white.
Oh,
I can
black and white,
remember
yeah.
they were black and white. But I was listening to the radio the other day, and one of the DJs on it, he was talking about, uh, you know, I can't even remember where I was going with this now, but what was it like when you actually moved? I suppose back. You're married now in Achill Island, where your
That's
parents were
correct.
from, and you haven't an ounce of Irish of the Oscuelga, have you, or are you learning it?
It'd be a lie to say that I don't have some, but I would be very weak. The the um, the the period of time when I wasn't learning Irish through the book was very difficult for me. I
Yeah,
really only learned Irish when I went to college and took it as a language. And I was in my late 20s at that stage. And I realized that because the teacher, the lecturer we had when I was in my late 20s going to GMIT and taking that as my language, she very much emphasized the
yeah,
oral part of Irish,
yeah, yeah.
speaking it rather than reading it from the book. But look, I had trouble with English, never mind Irish, going through national school.
But James, I
So
think it's incredibly important. It's an incredibly important to learn the language orally. Too many of us were forced to actually learn all the grammar and the Mochneloch and the I'm Shakata and the
it
I'm Shiloric.
as a child with learning issues, and I've had tests done in that since as an adult. Um, but looking back now, but it was the educational system at the time. You were slow. Nobody was thinking that anybody had certain. We weren't extreme special needs children, but
Yeah,
a little bit of assistance would have gone a huge way. A lot of the nuns that were teaching me at the time over the first until I was probably in third or fourth class, the teachers were all in their well into their 50s.
yeah.
So yeah, then we got young teachers who came out of college, and they were a bit more advanced, but still in all, the education system here in Ireland for children with dyslexia, um, autistic, problems with maths, all of the special assistance that they get today hadn't started to evolve until the mid 90s.
Yeah, but you know, James, I mean, we're talking about a language there, and you're immersed completely in it because you're living on Achill Island, and
Don't kid
hence,
yourself, Ara. Now, come on, live in the real world, Mary. I'm not.
yeah, but
I'm not. Look, there's nobody walking around Achill Island. People can turn around that might be Irish speakers and feel a bit. No, there's nobody walking around Achill Island speaking Irish every single day. Like I might
really,
be. Absolutely, it's just the reality. I still feel. I would not like to see the Irish language disappear.
oh no, nor me.
However, I do feel it's questionable sometimes the approach, and still the approach of some people to the Irish language. So look, I'm not a good enough expert, but at the same time, I'm qualified in heritage and culture. So the heritage of these things has it's kind of a different argument, but it's one off the other. It's part of our culture, but the Irish language, the thought that it's, I often will get this. I don't. I think it's the choice. I think if, as an adult, if I want to immerse myself into the Irish language, that's something I will do. If I want to immerse myself in French, or I want to immerse myself in various different things, because at the end of the day, we are a global country now. That doesn't necessarily take us away that we're not Irish. But I'll ask you the question, Mary. What is Irish? Who are Irish? What is the Irish? I'm somewhat out of the school of Eston Evans rather than the school of Eamon de Valera's brother in
Yeah,
archaeology. Like, I'm not into this. We are, like, I know myself, I'm English born, I'm Irish raised, my parents were Irish, I'm English born. I've Irish blood in me. But I've also planters' blood in me from the Tudors. We were planted into the border counties from Scotland.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
like,
Well, I feel the same, you know. I mean, I was born in the UK. My father was English, my mother was Irish, and she brought me back at an early age. Now, she spoke fluent Irish, and but she
Mary,
never
do you?
spoke it in front of my father because he wouldn't have had a clue.
Well,
And he was quiet enough.
he could have learned. It's not to
Oh,
say
Lord, God love him. He did
I
try.
can I can sit in a room and I won't get lost in the conversation unless they're talking, you know, really rapid. I
I
if
think he
they
would have
talk
eventually if she had
I,
actually kept it up.
if I spoke moderately, people spoke moderately, slow to moderate, I'd be okay. I would cope.
Yeah.
If it's good choppy, really, really going fast, look, I'll have problems. But when I say Scottish ancestry, I've dated my bloodline right back to the period of time off the plantations into Ireland. So
Okay.
like that's a way back. We're talking it certainly, I believe, was in the Tudor times. And it
I'd
was from
love
the
to
border
actually
counties.
do. I'd love to do heritage and to trace my ancestry.
Well,
It's
but
something that I've.
get the ancestry.com.
I
Just get
know. I
that.
know. It's easy to say I'm a procrastinator, by
Well,
but you know. I mean, but I suppose James, you're also related to the other famous Kilbane, who I accidentally called you Kevin Kilbane the other day on Facebook, and I was a Facebook friend of mine who's a DJ with the local radio station. He said, James Kilbane, Mary, Kevin is the footballer. Now,
and
my
that's
own
okay.
cousin was a footballer, but apparently, when I was researching, I found out that you're related to Kevin Kilbane. You probably
I
don't
am
know
actually on two sides of the family. Oh, I do, on two, very much so, on two sides of the family. And a lot of people, he's taller than me, but a lot of people would say there's a bit of a resemblance. But
that. Yeah,
he is related in the Kilbanes. He's related in that side of the family, and I'm also very closely related to him via the
yeah,
Corrigan connection that's here on the island as well. And because my mother and my father were fifth cousins when they married, so there was a little bit
oh
of the
wow,
relation, the family connected, shall we say again. So I'm related. My father is related to him, and my mother is related, but she's closer related through the Corrigans. But we are, and I've met him several times. Now it wouldn't be we'd always say hello, and we know it's relevant, our relationship and that.
Can I ask you, and I don't know if you saw the movie The Banshees of Inisherin. I know it
Yes.
was, how close is probably, you're probably sick of being asked this, but is there any closeness at all to the wilderness and to the beauty that's on that?
Oh,
was reflected
absolutely.
in that?
Where the pub was,
Mm.
where the pub was, and they were drinking the pints, and where the statue was on the road, and one of them went one way, and the other one went the other way.
That's what's in my head.
That those areas are about 5 minutes walk away from where my dad grew up.
It looks absolutely idyllic.
Achill was very beneficial to Martin McDonough and his crew, because like to have those various different types of landscapes on the one island is very fortunate for the filmers, and they still look different. But the reality is there's actually a geological split in Achill Island.
Yeah.
So where the beach was that the house was on, the geology down there is very different to the geology that's up where the pub was.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same island.
It just looked absolutely stunning, I have to say.
You see, but it looks stunning from the point of view as well that people might not think. It looks stunning because the soil and the rock underneath the ground gives you different landscapes, because it's different.
And when the rain hits it, or when the sun hits it,
The beach area where the house was, and the where the pub was, as the crow flies, it's probably about maybe 5 miles. By road, you're talking about 16 miles.
How difficult is it to get to Achill? Because I actually went one time when I was an entertainer in Bunratty Castle, and I went one time with a friend of mine to Innisherin, over on the Happy Hooker, and I never forget it, ever. I had to be. She was the harpist in Bunratty, and I was the dancer, and we went for a day, and she had to actually push me into a room, and I had to lie down. I was so ill from the boat over.
All right, okay.
How difficult is it to get to Achill?
You drive on a bridge.
I've never been there to Achill.
Well, we've had a bridge since 1887.
I've never been to Achill. Isn't it shocking? And we're living on the same island.
That's okay. You might make it this year.
I imagine the Banshees of Innisherin have brought an influx of interest to traveling to Achill.
I don't know whether it's totally brought a huge amount of people yet, but it certainly has brought, as you say, you put it well, an influx of interest.
Yeah.
And awareness. People have become aware of Achill Island.
They're not going to go if it's the Happy Hooker over.
Look, you're driving. It's a long time since somebody had to be brought on a boat to cross in from land. You're talking. There used to be a bridge that had to buy off the ferry.
This was 1989, 88. And
the Happy
Lord.
Hooker. Well, there wasn't any beverage going on the hooker as well, was there?
No, and I've never drank alcohol, but the thing about it is I could have done with it that day. I'll never forget it. The image, and I spent most of the day in bed trying to getting across there, but it was fabulous then.
Well, Mary, you've no excuse now. There's a good road nearly all the way to Castlebar, and then the road the road isn't as good then from Castlebar to Achill, but look, it's not bad. You'd make it from where you are there in probably 2.5 hours.
Listen to me. We went up to actually perform for Ronald Reagan years ago in Ashford Castle in Mayo. Mother of Divinity. The road just rattled the whole way.
Well, the journey's an awful lot better now. Sure, there's motorway all the way to Tuam.
You'd never get insurance on the bus that we went on. You'd never get it now.
Times were very different then now.
And we thought it was fantastic, but it was like an eternity getting up to Mayo from Limerick. But what was I going to say? You won, or you were second in the Eurostar. Did you realize then that was actually going to be, I suppose, the start of your fame,
Well,
if you like?
well, fame. I always use the term, and I appreciate people saying to me. I always have the term in relation to the word fame. Fame is worth silver and gold, but a good name is worth all the wealth in the world. It's one of Solomon's proverbs, and it's something that I've.
So true, though.
Yeah, fame is worth silver and gold. A good name is worth all the wealth in the world. So you can have the fame, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be well got or well respected, but a good name. So I want to have a good name, and I appreciate people saying to me that you have an element of fame, and there was a certain amount of element of fame, and it gave me able to evaluate. I'm lucky, I suppose. At the time, I was 33. I was 32 going into it. So I'd been around the block, and we had 2 children. They were coming into teenagers. They were going off to secondary school or in secondary school. They never missed a day at school. And in all that period of time, and they were great, Diane and Daniel. And look, it wasn't like as if I hadn't been gigging for years. I'd been gigging since I was 16. Like I was singing public.
Becoming an overnight success.
Yeah, I did. Look, you learn when you're doing dances and you're doing lounges and you're doing residencies and 2 pieces and 3 pieces and one-man shows, and you never want to die a death on any night that you're out. Even when I was just kicking off and starting up this way or that way or having an Irish night, you don't want to be dying a death. And that's the same thing. You're getting it. It was a great learning curve, but I'd have to say as well, going to college, getting my degree, getting my couple of qualifications, learning, going back into education, because I don't have a leaving cert. I dropped out of school. I got the opportunity to go back to school and to college after a terrible accident. So I value that, and I worked hard. I knew I wasn't the sharpest chisel in the toolbox, but I'm delighted that I was able to take advantage of the situation that college and study has changed to continuous assessment. So the continuous assessment situation really suited me, because before I went to college, I started back into education through VITAS, the vocational training.
So did I.
And that allowed me to learn to type. Once I learned to type, having to resubmit anything handwritten, everything was typed up. So in college then, with all my work and with the final exams, I was always getting in and around between 75 and 90.
That's fantastic.
So that was it. I was getting a good mark. I was always getting 45, 50s. And then my final exam, all I was needing to get over 60 was maybe 15 or 20%. But I'd always get myself up over the 70s, over the 80s. So like the continuous for me was a huge benefit. And look, there's an awful lot of the work in my recordings. We work to a template. I feel working to a template is very important in designing. Now I design all my stuff, an awful lot of my stuff, because there's so much ability out there online. And fame is worth, look, I've continued to kind of harvest, but one of the things that I'm fortunate of, as being gone through college, a big part of it was around 4 years of marketing and 4 years of public relations as part of the heritage and culture course. They were telling us basically to learn how to sell, look, products, crafts, heritage centers, evaluation, marketing, understand your market, you know, product and place, all of this, all of that, everything, you know. So we did. It was a super course, and you know something, it was really good for me. I'm very grateful in that period of my life to the career guidance lady. She put me really on the right course.
But James, don't you think that it's very important to instill a sense of lifelong learning in people? I mean, when you look at our grandparents or our parents even, who felt that once they left school, that was education over, and people even before that. And
but Mary, I'm
now
going to kind of
everyone is
correct you
still
there
learning.
a little bit, because I brought a group. I do 3 holidays a year. We call it Spirit and Soul. It used to be in Hotel Westport. Now it's moved to Knock. So the next one is in June. But I took them up to Strokes Town House and the Famine Museum there. That was wonderful. I learned a lot in there. But bringing them back again to Turla House and the Museum of Country Life, and though in my great grandfather's time, my grandfather's time, lifelong learning. If they went to national school until they were 12, they were doing well. If they were able by the time that they were 15 to be able to read and write, they were so much better off than their mothers or their fathers. Because if you look at the censuses, many of them write down they can't read or write, that they cannot read, they cannot write. But however, Mary, you look at the ropes, you look at the thatching, you look at the stories around how they fished. There's lifelong learning in that. They didn't call it lifelong learning.
No.
But it's something that somebody said to me there recently about Achill Island and the Banshees. Yeah, we've got super fantastic cinematic footage of this island, which has gone globally, and Taylor Swift wants to have a pint and a drink where they were drinking the pints, like. And I bring in Taylor Swift. We'd be delighted to see her. I'd be delighted to see her in Achill. I'd love to meet her. I might do a duet with her sometime. But
there you go.
But the reality is in that interview that I gave in relation to that question, and I say this hand on my heart, the same way as I'm sure people did back then. The beauty of Achill, if you live around here, you can't eat it. You can't eat it. And it's as tough here. It's not as tough, but it's still tough here in the likes of here and on the Arden Islands and various different places, Arden, Moorhoff, Donegal, or whatever. And there's still an element of survival. And this is still the 21st century. We're still, there's still a little bit of, we're a lot better off than what we were 40, 50 years ago. But, on the other side of it then, Mary, are we better off? There was more things in this island. When I was in my teens, we had youth clubs, we had more social. Now the youngsters have to go 60 miles up the road to a big place called Julian's in Midfield, outside Claremorris, from Achill. That's their nightclub.
I've been saying that for a long time. You look here in Limerick, they dismantled. Now you can argue about emblems of Britain or whatever, but not so much monuments, but places like Cruises Hotel, the Royal George Hotel, the Canucks, magnificent Canucks, St. John's Convent Girls' School, where I went. 200 years old it was, and they knocked it to the ground to build a prefabricated school, all in the name of progress. And you look at this prefabricated building, if you like, a flat roof that has had to be rebuilt 3 times, and the cathedral beside our school is still standing, and it's the same age as the school that they knocked. And God only knows where the stone went. It probably went in as rubble or in some mound, if you like, or backfill, and all in the name of progress. And you look at what was built before and the workmanship that went into it, and the skills that were learned and the skills that were passed down from grandparent to parent to son, and so on and so forth. I found it impossible. I had my roof came in, to get a builder to come to the house to give a quote.
I have a question for you, Mary. When was that school knocked and the prefabs put in? Are you talking the 60s or the 70s?
1972. It was
okay.
One of our nuns went to the school, and she or went to England, and she saw all these flat roofs and modern looking insides, and we had a dark stone, the very same as the cathedral, and it was all dark oak. All they had to do was replace the internal shell of the school. It would have been still here. And they knock it in the interest of progress, and they put all these shiny things there that don't last.
But really, there was a lot of these small churches that were knocked at the time, and these other little prefab type churches built in a lot of parishes along the west coast of Ireland as well. They happened in the 60s and the early 70s. I really think we can't. That's more or less a half a decade ago, half a century. I don't believe if it was today that school would be knocked.
Oh, I don't know. I think
there'd be some sort of an order put on it and made use of it.
You have simpletons in every council. Right 2 minutes from my house, there's a house called Baru House, and it was owned by Kate O'Brien, one of our greatest female writers in this country, probably our greatest female writer, Kate O'Brien. And she lives less than 2 minutes from my house. And my mother used to spend a lot of her childhood going in and out of it with Kate O'Brien's nieces and that who owned the house after her. That house was left practically falling down. If it was James Joyce's house or anyone like that, it would have been restored and it would have been turned into an artist retreat or something like that. It's now, I think, being used as to be honest with you, I don't know what it is. I tried finding out. Someone bought it privately, but it was never. There's no monument up to Kate O'Brien, no plaque, nothing to Kate O'Brien. Here lived Ireland's greatest female writer. Nothing to her. And I don't understand. They talk about progress, and I think in many cases the effort to progress only ends up in us going backwards.
I call it kind of the cancel mentality, shall we say, of our society at the moment. You touched on, the renaming of streets or buildings. You didn't say it in that way, but more or less that's what you were saying. And there is that cancellation, people wanting to cancel out the past, things of the past that they don't necessarily want to identify with or going forward, that they don't want it in society, like the library in Trinity. Yeah, like are the Americans going to take George Washington off the dollar because are we going to stop singing Amazing Grace because John Newton was a slave dealer? But actually,
you're never going to change history.
Pete, there are people who like the likes of John Newton. Actually, when you look at his life, he actually then ended up being one of the catalysts for getting the abolishment of slavery started in England. So like, you have to kind of give due process. We can't write people's lives, and there's one big word: change. To allow people, to give them the time and accept that people do change, and they changed from how they thought in one day to how they thought in another day. We cannot say that Martin McGuinness, the likes of Martin McGuinness, didn't change. He had to have changed when he turned around and did the
Oh, he
monumental
did.
things that
He
that they
did.
did.
They
They
did,
did,
and
yeah.
without Martin McGuinness, Jerry Adams, the likes of Ian Paisley, Mo Mowlam,
Yeah,
had those
just
people not got together and sat down and spoke to people that they would never in a million years want to speak to or think of speaking with, to actually, and it's a bugbear of mine. I always feel that Mo Mowlam there should be a monument to Mo Mowlam in this country.
well,
There should be
you
something to the
touched
woman.
on the lady that was the writer, and I'll give you an
Kate
example.
O'Brien.
The Achill Bridge that's crossing into Achill has always been dedicated to Michael Davitt. But the truth and of the history of the story with the bridge and Michael Davitt onto Achill Island is that Michael Davitt did very little. He did extremely very little. But it was considered he was Roman Catholic at a very sectarian time nationally and on the island, right? So we had those issues on the island between Protestants and Catholics. There was inner problems on the island, and had been for a few decades. And then this man from Fermanagh. Now, I read about him in one of Eston Evans' books when I was in college, but then it was brought to my attention about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, and it was very much confirmed, the story about this man, John Vesey Gray Porter.
Okay,
And his grandfather was the bishop in Killala, the Church of Ireland bishop, and his father was a Church of Ireland reverend. And this man, John Vesey Gray Porter, lost 2 horses swimming them out of Achill because there was no bridge. And he got involved with getting the bridge to Achill. And because the organization that was going to put a bridge onto Achill was going to put a bridge that was going to cost £500 during the time. You're talking 1877, 1879, around that time. So they continued on anyway. Vesey Porter, John from Fermanagh, Belle Isle in Fermanagh, turned around and says, you need a better bridge than that. And he came along and he stumped up the money. He put up something like £7,000 in the day, and they were to pay it back. And he made a remark. He says, it's supposed to be a loan, but I don't know if I'll ever see it. And nobody knows if he did. Now, so many people 5 years ago, so the bridge was eventually put in 1887, and they named it after Michael Davitt. Well, they weren't going to name it, sadly, after a man who was the grandson of the regional's Anglican bishop. Times had changed, but he gave goodwill, fair play to that man, and that man changed the life of Achill people. We've never been like Edward Nangle, who doesn't get good press locally here, but he is now. He's getting better press because the truth is being told. That he came along, John Vesey Gray Porter put up the money. We have a board facing the bridge on a building, a very 19th century building that has his image and tells the story of his involvement in the bridge. Now, we're not going to change the name of the bridge. The bridge is still the Michael Davitt Bridge. But at some stage into the future, we might put a plaque of some sort on the bridge that remembers the man who was John Vesey Gray Porter. But I have no desire to change the bridge from the Michael Davitt Bridge. That would be wrong. But there is a certain element of mishistory, misinformation. Just people at the time, I'll call it in a modern day, wanting to be cool for school, wanting to be popular.
This is what it is. I mean, as an historian, I just don't get the idea that I love to see history being remembered for all its good and all its bad, because, there's no point in trying to whitewash out history. You tell it as it is. and you learn from it, the positive lessons or the negative lessons to avoid. We're, as a society, I think there's a certain element of just get rid of it and it hasn't happened, or don't teach about it and nobody is going to carry on the mistakes. But people are human beings, and people, unless they have something to look at that was actually bad and have something to look at that was absolutely good, I don't think they can progress and learn, to benefit from both lessons that they're learning. The idea that you can actually just erase historical events, or and the learning of historical events or historical people or historical monuments, and that suddenly you're going to make the world a better place. No, you're not. You're only going to make the world a better place by learning, bringing the history with you. It doesn't mean that you bring the ideology of that history with you, but you certainly learn from it. I mean, we see it all the time now with the efforts to change the writers, to change the wordings of writings like Roald Dahl, and the unmitigated nerve of people to think that they could even be in the same class a writer as Roald Dahl or Jane Austen, and change what happened in the 19th century, in the case of Emma or Jane Austen, and to bring what happened in the 19th century cultural society into the 21st century. You've got to learn from what were people like then. Why did they think like that?
Well, yes, absolutely, and
Why did they
like,
act
and
like that?
you see, it takes away if you change history, it takes away if you try to do that, or leave in some things that suit and leave out other things.
Yeah,
that then takes away from the work of Abraham Lincoln. That
it's
takes
a la
away the
carte.
work. That takes away the work of William Wilberforce, who turned around and worked with John Newton and got rid of abolishment of the slavery and the whole story around that. You can't turn around. But I will be critical. This is what is Irish, and that's a big, vast conversation for another day from a historical point of view. But I have become an element of critical of the history around our point of view. We often hear Irish people say, English people don't have an understanding of history, but we're lucky, we're Irish, we do. Now, I really have serious question with that, because if we were just even to select the Irish English, the Irish crown, the narrative in relation to our relationship over the centuries with England, with the UK, there's so much huge amount of misinformation. It's nearly like, the Normans landed and they invaded us, and we've never had a minute's peace, and we've been. But it's really, if you start digging, and I came up that I was asked to contribute to something recently around what was initially just to be discussed, the O'Keefe chalice. And then when the interview happened, it became this Cork chalice. And
the Cork people,
I pulled her up straight away. I said, let's get something straight here now. Let's not start calling it the Cork chalice, because when that chalice was actually given or made, there wasn't even a cork even identified as. You were talking the 1590s. Cork wasn't even. It was only being formulated at the time. If they said the barony of wherever, I'd say, yeah, fine. If they said the diocese of wherever down in that region of Munster, fine, or the Munster chalice, I'd have said, okay, you'll get away with that, but don't go calling it the Cork chalice. And I says, it's the O'Keefe chalice. So the interviewer, she came along and backed us straight away. And I says, there's 100 years between when that was stolen and when it was made. And I says, you must remember the turbulent period of time in the history of Ireland, in that you had the Tudors, you had the loss of Brehon law, but then when it actually was the battle, when it was taken away from those two monks, it was Williamite forces that took it. It wasn't the Jacobite forces that were taking it. I says people need to realize that the Jacobite forces were the Stuarts. It was an English king. And the Williamite forces may have, but they were English troops, they were English troops that took the chalice. I says, stop there. They were majority of that force, that military force, were either made up of Dutch, Finnish, or not Finnish, Dutch, there's Dutch, Danish, and French. And you have
French.
a percentage of that were English. Or there'd have been a touch of French because of the House of Orange.
Yeah, William of Orange.
It wasn't like what we think of it, France today. So we can't turn around and say William was the British forces. That's complete mishistory. That's completely wrong. Probably the men that slain those priests could have been Dutch. It just so happened that King James's daughter was married to William, and she was Protestant. And they didn't want a Catholic king over there. And he came over with some Scottish, some English forces, and he had some Sarsfield and a few people to fight on the Jacobite forces. So to turn around and say that it was English forces that slain those two priests, and I made the point, the chalice was bought in 1929 and sold off to this museum in London. So the reality is that chalice possibly lived in that one of those soldiers' families for that period of time. It's likely, because the landlordism, all of that, they were selling off family wares left, right, and center, Irish, English, wherever, because they couldn't raise the money anymore. Big houses, so many big houses like Strokestown. They were selling off paintings and everything. And I would safely say, I says, I'm putting it across the airways now, I would feel that was directly sold from one of the descendants of one of those soldiers to the museum for money. And anyway, what Strongbow came in, he was invited, Mary. He was invited to come in. He wasn't invading. And he married the king's daughter up in Dublin because the king wanted to get one back on the other king that was down the road. That was Ireland of the past, but nobody wants to hear this in our society. Nationalists don't necessarily, certainly Republicans don't want to be entertaining what actually was the truth.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. I was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. When we've been there 10,000
James, it's utterly fascinating your passion for both
History,
history and I suppose heritage
culture.
and
Heritage and culture, yeah. But I'll be
culture.
honest with you, it's a great thing, Mary, then when I go over to the States, particularly when I'm down south.
Yeah,
Being able to identify and coming from an agrarian population here in Ireland and being able to link up with the first immigrants that went over to the Appalachians and to the Virginians and the Kentuckys and the Mississippis and the Tennessees. You know, there's so much Irish. It
do
just
you
means
like
that they were.
do you like the south of America? I imagine I've never been to the southern states, but I imagine they're just glorious, especially
Very,
around
look,
Georgia or
I love the food. I love so much of the people. I have so much family in the north, like Cleveland and Chicago, but it is industrial. Those areas still are industrial, but the smaller towns aren't industrial. Like America has got problems, and America has they're all their own independent states with their own little different laws
their own little government.
and their own little governments and all of that. And I'll be honest with you, Mary, the food is great. There's a great welcome, but I've come up against racism on both sides. And it simply is racism. It's
It's
race
well,
it's
racism is
racism,
racism.
it's racism in very deep southern places.
Yeah,
The whites are being racist and the blacks are being racist. And I don't know whether some things will never change. And I've always had a great welcome in all the communities.
but it's
But
all down to James. I think it's all down to um, I don't know. I just think it's all down to empathy, and I think that they spend so much time in schools teaching subjects that are of little importance in the long run to people as they grow and move into the out into the world. But I think subjects like empathy are subjects that should be focused on, where people can actually try and, I suppose, you're never going to step into the world of another person because your own world is the only world you can actually understand. But it's tragic, I think, when you see the hatred that can, I suppose, develop between people purely because of the ethnic group they belong to or because of the color of their skin, both ways. And people don't seem to think that racism can be towards white people, which of
well, yeah,
course it can.
well, like people, I'll make a comparison here within our own country. And I notice it when I go to the north of Ireland, right? And I notice it then when I when I'm in our own community here in different parts, rural, island, whatever. And I think there's an education side of it, well, because Achill Island had one of the first ever co-ed schools in the country. And the man that did it had to stand up to the church and stand up to the bishop and everything. He was summoned and he says, what would you prefer? Them getting a second level education because they don't have the money to go up to Jarlath's or all these boarding schools. For them to get a second level education, boys and girls in the same classroom, or over in the same bothy, sleeping side by side. Which would you prefer? And you know what a bothy is? The place that the barn that just go to pick potatoes. The bishop couldn't argue with that. And he was renting an old station house over in the disused railway that was at the Sound. And he started it around 1948 or 49. That man broke the back of poverty, started to break the back of poverty in this island. It can be marked down to him. And then the other thing that broke the back of poverty in Achill was up until about the 1960s. From the 1930s, the Land Commission were subdividing the land and making stripes. You see it all around the country, more so in some places than others. But once in Achill, you could see in certain places, the Land Commission didn't stripe the land until the late 60s and early 70s. So you had this type of, did you ever hear Rundale? The Rundale
No.
system used, it was very associated with the famine, infield, outfield. You could have 5 acres or 4 acres scattered around the village. You'd have a third of an acre here, and you might have the size of the table there, and you'd be crowing. Oh, it was nuts. But it was the system that was there at the time, and it was kind of like a legacy of Rundale. Historians have said to me, "Oh, but it's not the true Rundale, but it is a legacy of it. It was an evolution of Rundale, but it lasted very, very late into Achill, right on Achill and in the parish of Achill, in certain villages. And once that changed as well, the school and the division of the lands, that broke the back of poverty in rural communities, gradually, gradually, gradually. Now, I'm going to put that the same way. Did you ever notice in our society here that there'd be certain parts of our society that would say, well, we're entitled to it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of Southerners will have, well, but we're entitled to that. We're entitled no matter what. In the north of Ireland, you will get people from the other traditions. Now, and I don't want to be getting into any politics like gerrymandering and all of that, where somebody'd say, well, there was reason for that. But I find with the Northerners, the Northern people that I might work with, good people in the Presbyterian or Anglican church, they're very straight. They'll pay you. You agree something with them, their word is their bond. They won't go back on that.
Yeah.
I cannot always say that in Catholic Ireland, that's not the same. There'll always be some in the parish or the community that'll turn around and, well, we did, but you might do it a bit better. Like, you might, try and get that one over situation. Not in all, it's not as bad as it used to be. But we do have this element, and you will find it in cities as well, that like, well, we won't get a job, we won't better ourselves because we'll get the free handout. Now, I'm a farmer, so I can't turn around, and I have sheep. I can't turn around because at the end of this day, is Ireland a socialist country or not a socialist country? Well,
it's definitely not a socialist country.
Ireland is a socialist country.
Do you think so?
Ireland is getting revenue. Ireland cannot stand up on its own 2 feet. We wouldn't survive. The farmers would not survive without the revenue coming in from Achill Island. Gets about €2 million in revenue payments and everything. Where would the local supermarket and the fertilizer and all of these things? It'd soon drop. We are a socialist state. We're not a socialist state as a Marxist state, even though Marxists spent time in Achill Island that actually influenced as capital. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Well, there you know it now. He did. He came to Achill and spent about
Karl
4 or
Marx
5.
spent time on Achill.
He did, yeah. When he was studying and working in Dublin, he worked and studied in Dublin. He was up in Trinity or someplace like that. He came to Achill, and he's seen the Rundale system. He's seen the clock
and Jenny the donkey.
Well, I'm sure he's seen plenty of donkeys at that time when he was here, but he did come to Achill, and it is a train of thinking that it influenced as capital. Okay, this communal situation. But the reality is Ireland is in an element not a communist state, but it is a socialist state, because look at the amount of payments for this, payments for that. And in the United States, in the southern states, the most of people that are on welfare are African American, or people in the small towns that don't have jobs anymore. And it's
but you see, I think if as you say, Ireland is a socialist state, it's a failed socialist state, because there are people who continue to have less than nothing in this country, while others seem to be thriving. And I'm of the belief that, okay, everyone needs to go out and work for their money, but there are people who cannot simply work for many, many, many reasons.
And Mary,
they're
and they need to be supported. But
they're continuously under the living wage. I mean, they talk about a living wage, and yet you have people on social welfare who cannot get jobs, or
they
for
can't
whatever
move.
reason,
There's
and they're
people on
kept on
Achill Island,
250 euros a
but
week.
there's people on Achill Island who can't get jobs, and they can't leave the island either. There's people in every community up and down the length of the country. That's understandable. Their situations, they'll maybe get a bit of a part-time job. They might be able to work 20 hours a week in the supermarket, but they need to be home for their kids. They need to be home for elderly parents. They need to be home, which they're helping the state in another way, because the parents aren't going to become an issue in relation to the
nursing
state.
homes.
Yeah, so there is always going to be those situations. But there are other situations where it's been exploited. Look, all I can say is it was what happened with during the COVID situation. I firmly believe was a brilliant mark of craftsmanship, statesmanship, economics, by turning around and paying people to stay at home, paying people to work from home, to survive, because it kept our economy. When the economy came back strong. There was nobody being destitute. There was nobody out on the street. We weren't going back to the 1850s.
Well, I think I personally think people should be encouraged, those who wish to stay at home and look after elderly parents, who, after all, as you say, and quite rightly, if they were going into a nursing home or they were in a hospital, it would be costing the state a fierce amount of money or the families to put family members into nursing homes. Whereas if they were looking after them at home and were paid properly to look after their families at home, and to look after the carers allowance is abysmal. People are not encouraged to actually stay at home and look after their own children. They're being put to the pin of their collar to go out to work, and then to pay for child minding for their children, whereas they might opt to stay at home if being a stay-at-home parent was valued more in this country. So if, as you say, that we live in this socialist society,
well,
there's absolutely failed effort at socialism, because not under the idea of socialism that I like, everyone should be getting a decent wage, and everybody should be living, having a proper livable wage, but they're not.
But within the socialism, then, if you look at it, it doesn't encourage entrepreneurs. It doesn't encourage those who have the ability, who turn around and want to get rich, who want to turn around and put people to work.
Yeah, and that's where it fails. That's where it fails. You'd like to have a little bit of both.
And I think we're the identity that we're not a socialist state, but we somewhat are elements of a socialist state, because there is a lot of social activity going on to keep people alive, to keep them going. And you know something, I think Ireland has so many wonderful things, but it's we're never. And I'm on somewhat on the periphery. You're only a few miles, or in the city, or practically in the city.
I am right in the heart of the city.
I think that we could be generating electricity on the island. That there could be cooperatives for solar power. That locations like this could be a win-win for the state. but they're not investing, putting in the infrastructures that we could generate to put it back into the grid. To
Yeah.
get there, there's a lot of things that the public, like Ryan turned around and says, oh, last January, oh, for sure people are going to be getting paid for electricity that they generate. It still hasn't happened. And there isn't the will in the ESB maybe for it to happen because they're so unionized that it would start to take away from their profits, which we've seen they had big profits this year. And they're such a big
Massive
organization.
profits, and they should be
Yeah.
made to pay huge tax on those profits, and that tax should be given back to the people that were actually paying for the electricity.
Or I am of the believing, I would be a little bit out of the school of Donald Trump on this. Before he ever became president, I read a number of his books, but years and years ago. But I would be of the thinking the ESB should be made to reinvest in electrical infrastructure.
Exactly, yeah.
Infrastructure.
If you're going company that the ESB the prices have been astronomical. The same with the gas, and they've made exorbitant profits. And they can't tell people, oh, we bought in the gas and we bought in the electricity, it came at more expensive, so we had to charge people more. And yet you find out that they've earned billions in profit.
I would be just off the thinking, like people would say, well, it should be put into this and it should be put into social and it should be put into various different things. Maybe a percentage, but I would be off the thinking, because Trump would often say that if they're people and they're a big tax, if they don't want to pay the tax, if they're not happy to do that, make them invest into more infrastructure, put people to work, put shovels in the ground, pay for that, and then give them the tax breaks for it. If they want to get rich, because at the end of the day, they want to get rich. There's people all around the country don't want to get rich. They just want to live their lives. They just want a job.
But everybody should have there should be a living wage below which nobody in this country should be living. You should, I mean.
Well, Mary, I would also, if the likes of the ESB invested into infrastructure, right? If it started to reduce people's living costs, then the people would have more money.
Absolutely.
So, like, there's different ways of working it that it's not going to be costing people. Because I don't, you see some people on social welfare and they've the best of everything. I don't have the best of everything. I can't afford it. Or I choose not to put my resources into that. There's people that try to live above their means. Now, there's nothing wrong with being comfortable, but I do have a problem with being greedy or looking that, living above their means. And people back in the noughties were being given money. Nobody forced people to take money. Nobody forced people to build a mansion of a house that eventually they couldn't pay for.
Yeah, that happened during the tiger economy.
Oh, yeah, but
mobile homes and holiday homes and cars.
Yeah, they did, and they thought it was great, and should borrow a bit more. Like, nobody was saying to them, if they had the right mind.
I went through that whole period broke.
I'm not feeling sorry for any of those people. They made up their own problems. Yes, but if they were good enough and they felt strong enough to do it, to get themselves out of a hole, get them to the hole, they should have thought about it beforehand. Like, we all got opportunities to invest money in different things or whatever, take on this or take on that. There's a choice of doing it and not doing it. And
I suppose, to go on to your music for a bit, where is when did you realize that this is going to be my career for the rest of my life? And obviously, I'm not. Hear me out here now. I know that you are somebody who doesn't follow the crowd or the herd. You don't have the herd mentality. You're a man of a singular minded man. And that's pretty obvious from your opinions, both politically and socially and culturally and religiously, because I know you're also deeply spiritual and deeply religious. Um, uh, and I suppose you can be one without being the other. You can be very spiritual and not religious, or you can be very religious and not have a sense of spirituality, I think. But at what stage did you say to yourself, I'm a multi-platinum selling artist. I'm doing, this is what I want to do, and this is what I like to do. And have you kind of come to a stage in your life where you've decided, well, I no longer want to spend the rest of my life just being a singer or just being A, B, or C? Do you know?
I do.
Are there
Yeah,
other
I'm not
things you want to
interested.
do?
But
No.
what I will tell you is, I was probably about 4, and an uncle of mine put me singing, and he was home from America, and he turned to me and he says, "James," he says, "you are going to make millions. You are going to be a famous singer." And I think, something, he might have set something in my head. I was always quite musical, even from the cot. As soon as I was a child, like able to pay attention to a song, and I was still in the cot, I was there hopping and singing and going on, like singing and humming to the song, like nearly before I could say the words properly. So music has always been a part of me. I've done a lot, and I've got a huge amount to do. The Grand Ole Opry is a stage that, yes, I do want to sing in. But if I don't get to sing in it, I always wanted to sing on Top of the Pops. But there is no more Top of the Pops, not at the moment anyway. Will I get to number 1? Look, I've got to number 1, but it was in the religious music charts. It wasn't in the pop music charts, but I can still say I was at number 1. Now, at the same
Absolutely.
time, at the moment, and every week for the past 6 or 7 or 10 years, between 1 and 80 in our music charts here for religious and gospel music, I have 14 or 15. I'm the most included artist of all the global artists that's included in our Irish charts. Now, look, that's nice. It's nice to be able to say. I've got lots of nice things that I've been able to say. But if I were to say, being able to go in and enjoy recording, I'm good at it. I've pushed out the boundaries. I experiment. I'll try new things, but I won't throw out the baby, as they say, in the bathwater. So the idea, Mary, that I've been very lucky and I've been very blessed. And at the end of the day, I thank God for the gift that He has given to me, the talent of my voice. And the other things then, that I had something, I wasn't sharp chiseled. I wasn't the biggest, the top of the class. Most of the time, I was the last to be picked for anything. But you
Me
know
too.
something?
I was the last to be
That's
picked for every
but that's
basketball
but
team.
Mary, that's okay. That's fine,
But
because
you never forget it, James. You never forget it. I was the last to be picked for the
look, there was
basketball team.
yeah, but when I was singing, there was nobody who could touch me.
No one wanted me on their
You know,
team. I was
it just
I was too small.
when what I'm saying is, you strive to what you're good at. And there's, like, television is something I want to do. I want to do more of that. I was on, we did the 13 programs with Shalom. I got better and better and better every program that I did. I can do that. It's not a case of my not having the ability. I've got it. I've got the ability in a number of different things, but I've come to learn that you can have people who are great singers. As one person said to me once, "Who's your politics, James? Who are the people working in your background?" Because I'm still a believer the cream will always come to the top. But it's like if you become in the top 10 of the best in the country, there's another 9 people and their agents and their people who are pushing you down,
Yeah.
who are trying to keep you out. That's just, and that is capitalism. That is a free market. But the reality is that I can talk. I inform my
No,
mind.
really.
And you know, there isn't all the time in certain things. People won't necessarily take me on, but that isn't going to mean that I'm not going to do it or achieve it. It just means that they chose to stay outside the door when I had the door open and they didn't come in. What
You
do you
stepped
do?
in before them.
Oh
But
well, the door closed.
slap the door in their
Well,
faces.
you can't be letting in the cold all the time. Like, you leave the door open for when they're welcome, but like, are you coming in, or if you're not coming in, we'll stay out.
Stay out. I love
Stay
it.
out.
But come here, Kevin, or Kevin.
James.
Do you know who I'm thinking of? Kevin Clancy. That's who I'm about to ask you about. How did you get to know Kevin?
Well, I actually haven't
Isn't
met
he
Kevin.
lovely?
I
He's
haven't physically met Kevin yet.
Oh, he's
And
lovely.
I was working on that event this evening, actually, putting together some material, because like I would have, as I said, I have a background training in public relations and management of elements of events. You don't always get it right, but the reality is there's stages to these things. You can't do some things too quick, because it loses the momentum.
Can I just say for the audience here, Kevin Clancy is from Limerick, and he founded Claire's Wish Foundation in memory of his sister. And the modus operandi of the organization or the charity is to make a wish. It's almost, make a wish for dying or sick people, and
adults.
It's adults mostly. It's all adults, actually. Because there really isn't anything for adults. And he's been doing some superb work. I interviewed him twice, Kevin, and such a lovely gentleman, originally from England. Parents are Irish.
We're bringing our Irish folk and country event with a bit of trad. We're bringing that down to Cappamore on the I think it's Friday the 14th. Yeah, Friday the 14th of April at 8 p.m. And it's going to be a super night. It's something, people know me for a lot of gospel music, but I've done my Irish traditional and ballads for decades. So we have a great show, and we're going to the community hall down there in Cappoquin on the 14th of April. So really looking forward to people joining us on that night. And tickets are available locally and at Eventbrite, and you can book your ticket as well from the Claire's Wish Foundation website. So please, anybody watching this and able to go, please do go in and tune into that website, or locally at O'Dwyer's Pub in Cappoquin. Cappamore, not Cappoquin.
Cappamore, I was just going to say to you.
Cappamore, forgive me, Cappamore. Cappoquin's down in Waterford. We're over in Cappamore's down in Cappamore. That's where we're going to be.
They'd be going to the wrong place if they went to Cappoquin.
Yeah. And
there'd be a long time waiting for James.
There's another Kappa down there as well, isn't there?
Huh?
There's another village or another Kappa down there.
Kappa White?
Kappa White.
There's Cappamore, Kappa White, Cappoquin.
Well, another county. Let you forget about Cappoquin now. Cappamore.
Cappamore. It's on Claire's Wish Foundation event is on in Cappamore. On what date again?
Friday the 14th of April at 8 p.m. Irish folk and country with me, James Kilbane, whichever way you want to pronounce it.
James Kilbane. Well, James Kilbane, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Well, it's certainly, Mary, it's a conversation that I didn't think I was going to be having tonight, but you got culture, history, and everything. Socialism, Marxism,
racism.
Oh well, no, well we'll try and keep away from that.
No, but we were talking about anti-racism.
We were talking about my experience down in the Deep South, which I do love, But at the end of the day, I never met my great great grandfather, but I'm supposed to look like him. So my great-grandfather would have been born around the 1860s. His grandfather would have been born even long before the famine. You see, it's amazing how we think we're distant from our past, but we're not that distant.
No, and I mean, I found out that when I was doing my master's in English literature on childhood under Nazism, I found out that my great grandmother, my grandmother's mother's mother, on my paternal side was Jewish, and you wonder why you do things that you do, and I always wondered why. And people often ask me, why did you actually choose to that particular area of literature? And I suppose I was always profoundly social conscious, and uh, trying to find ways of bringing history to the present so that we can learn from it, so that we don't so that we're not destined to repeat it, or that obviously it's going to be repeated. It's human nature, sadly. But you would hope that people in the majority, in the round, would learn from these events and the importance of not forgetting. You know, I hear so many people saying, oh, but it happened 70 years ago or happened 80 years ago. But there's people still alive who are impacted by it, and their next generation are impacted by it, their children and their grandchildren, who have said to me on many occasions, I don't know where my mother's life ended and mine began, because their whole world, their whole childhood, adulthood was wrapped up in what happened to their parents and the fractured relationships they had. But you know, finding out the possible genetics of my great grandmother was the same as you finding out about that you had something in common with your great grandfather. You can't fight genetics, and you can't fight history. It's there.
You
It'll come out.
Look, do your ancestry.com. I did it, and it is hugely accurate. I can nearly take it to the bank, and there, you know, it's only for 50 or 80 or 90 euros or whatever it is. You do the bottle, you send it off, you do the package, all of that. The information, the wealth of information it gives is great, but it also connects you with people far off, cousins, like low. Look, I think it's.
You might find somebody that you don't want.
Yeah, look, it's fantastic. It's brilliant. And for somebody like you into research, I think it's very important to know where
you know. I found this whole conversation with you strange, because I thought we were going to be talking all about music, and it took all these wonderful little turns through history, through culture, through literature, through heritage, through music, and they're all interconnected because they're all the arts.
But Mary, we celebrated so much in the past few years, 1921, 22, the Civil War, the War of Independence. And we are a great nation now, which is great, and a respected nation all around the world. And yet we've still got legacies from the past 3, 4, 5, 1,000 years. And we mustn't forget those legacies, and but we must also identify the truths around those stories, not to just pick on what we want to believe. And we're probably going to come along at some stage or other in the near future to the return maybe of a political organization or a movement being in control within the country. But we're going to also be coming along and the question of Irish unity. But what is Irish unity? You know, we're going to have to embrace unionism. We're going to have to embrace those other elements on the island that are part of but also have to be part of the solutions.
They have to be.
If we're
Insofar as you look back at what we were talking about earlier, the likes of Mo Mowlam and John Hume, Martin McGuinness, Jerry Adams, Ian Paisley, a group of people that you would never in a million years think of getting together and with one aim, and that was to bring about peace, and it will go in order, I suppose, to become a united Ireland. We will probably have to embrace
a union of Ireland.
A union
Some
of
people,
Ireland. I mean,
a union.
I remember my own mother. She used to always say, "You and your father, you're blow-ins." She used to say as a joke, because no matter how many years you were in Ireland, you were always a blow-in unless you were 100 years here. And she used to say, "I'm Irish and I'm proud of it." And I used to say, "But Mom, your name is O'Dwyer and it's of Norman ancestry. So there's no such thing as the purity of a race. We're all an amalgamation of the people that came. And if you do your ancestry, or as you say, you spit in the cup and you send it off to be tested, you could probably have genetics that came from outer Mongolia. For all you know.
Well, I was actually quite narrow. It was quite narrow, my origins in that. So, like,
where were they from?
You're talking 1,000 years. Certainly, there was a shift in and around the Tudor times over into the north, with the period of time of the Tudors. That's when my bloodline came to Ireland. In the Tudors, from the border counties of Scotland. Who did that? They were the first planters. They were the Tudor planters. So I am a descendant of Scottish, English, border Tudor planters.
Okay.
That moved into Donegal, down into Sligo, and into Achill.
I hope mine is more exotic, and that there's something.
Well, if you've Jewish background,
I hope there's something really like India or Africa or something like that.
You could be Russia,
I just hope
Eastern
that there's
Europe,
a mishmash of everything.
maybe Israel.
This is it. But James Kilbane, it was an absolute pleasure and a joy to have spoken to you from the windy, hailstone Achill Islands, and I'll have to get down and hear you singing.
Well, come here to me. It was lovely having the chat with you, Mary, this evening. It passed, as we'd say here, it passed a grand hour.
An hour and a half. Can you believe it?
You're good company. We'll do it again.
We'll have to do it again. Loved your company. Feel like I've known you forever. Thanks ever so much, James and Sloan.
And remember, folks, the 14th of April, Cappamore, down there for our Irish Folk and Country Night with a bit of trad for the Clare's Wish Foundation. And hope to see you there. Tickets are available on Eventbrite from O'Dwyer's down in Cappamore, and also from the Clare's Wish website, direct from the Clare's Wish website. You can book your tickets and get your tickets. So we are really hoping to have a good crowd there. But thanks for the chat tonight, Mary Ann. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Slán leat.
Good night. God bless. Thank you.
Good night. God bless.
Good night, love.
Bye. Good night.
When you walk through the storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. and the sweet silver song of the lark. Walk